syntax of psychedelic time, fractals, endpoints, end times, 0 points, something like that. What all this indicates is a set of ideas that I want to share with you that are a slightly different tack than my normal lectures. My normal lectures deal with the psychedelic experience as a generalized and historical phenomenon. But this effort at communication is slightly more personal in that it's an effort to impart one idea that came out of an involvement with psychedelic substances. My idea. It is idiosyncratic. It is a psychedelic idea, certainly, but it's only one of an infinite possible set of such ideas. And the reason I spend time on it to communicate it to a group of people like this is because I think it can serve as an example of psychedelic ideas generally, how they're formed, how they operate, and what's so great about them. And perhaps with an element of ego, I think that this idea intrinsically has an elegance that makes it worth pursuing. Because I want to hold to ideas.
Yeah, Terence McKenna has this great quote, and it's something like, nature encourages, like you feel like you're throwing yourself into the abyss only to find out that it's a bed of roses. And I think it's like this natural, healthy kind of anticipation, or not fear, but like this little bit of anxiety. But every time, for me personally, and it's not just like with artwork or anything, it's just with life in general, when I feel like a little anticipation, before I started like going introspective, those are exact moments like, oh, I should be doing that because I don't feel comfortable doing it. Because then like later you find out, oh, it's like, why was I even worried about that? Like, why was I even like hesitant about that? Once you get past those little bit of hurdles, and then it's like, okay, what's next? What else can I do? Oh, let's do a little bit more. Let's do this. Let's do that. And it's really interesting how that goes back to this like fractal progression. Like the little bit turns into even deeper and more. You know, spinning out of control.
I think this is where entheogens take a very important place for all of us. Talking about psychedelics, talking about meditation or yoga or any practice that anyone has, I think these entheogens, all these supplies and tools that we have around us and within us are quite important in order to open dialogue and open ourselves to just what we're talking about, to our truer selves, and to this part that is willing to do more instead of just negating. And it's difficult sometimes just trying to express that to other people, but I think that's why we have psychedelics, and that's why we have meditation, and that's why we have...
Yay! You know SatoriD's been part of it.
I think for myself, when we're talking about psychedelics and exactly what you were saying, and these tools that we have, is prior to me having different experiences with mushrooms, like I knew the intellectual concept of Gaia, of the world being a living, breathing entity, and I was more into like philosophy and this kind of like headspace. But it was a whole other thing to actually have the felt experience of being a cell within the world and being a part of everything, and like literally sitting on the beach and feeling and being one with the heartbeat of the earth as a felt experience. And that's something that we could point to in our art, but it's a whole other thing to kind of give that gift of that experience, because I think that's something I know from my own personal experience that propels me to do different things and to keep on latching on to when I see someone expressing their true self, and being able to recognize that and being able to, in whatever small way of giving them encouragement or whatever it is. And I think one of the best experiences that I personally have is when I ever do something and it starts a ripple effect someone else. I say, oh, that inspired me to do this or do that. And then you see these kind of fractal expressions of this inner essence that we have, and how this connects to everything. And, as we talk about this, hopefully, people get encouraged to use these tools. And I think too, part of the reason is that the way things are right now, it's really hard, let's say here in the States, to have, lack of a better word, a sacred space to be able to do that. Like, I necessarily didn't have that. I did a gun-ho style of doing it. It's kind of just me personally, like the way I am. It's kind of like, that's why my psychedelic bed and breakfast, that's my imaginarium. And it goes without saying that it's a psychedelic bed and breakfast. But I'm not going to necessarily advertise it like that. But just as you were saying about your own personal art space, of having that space where you're able to do that, it's vastly important for that. And I think even to have these small little spaces that we carve out, and that's kind of necessarily what I try to do with Imaginarium, and even with SatoriD on Minds. Like, I always kind of say this, like, my channel is Switzerland. Like, all the other crap from everything else does not come to my shore. I make it a very cognitive importance to keep it that way. But going back to that is vastly important to me, and I think that the psychedelics are a very important tool. But also too, I like something Alan once said, like, once you get the message, it's time to hang up the phone. And the harder part is this integration process. And I think that integration process, it seems to me that you were processing this through your art, and you got that message, and then it was like, okay, now I need to process this. I'm still going through my own process, and I think we always go through the process, but it's really amazing how you could see that without necessarily like knowing it for a fact. But yeah,
right. I really appreciate psychedelics. I feel they're a great tool in order to grasp
I was just gonna ask you that.
But for me, I think it's also quite important what you were saying, Satori, how you were into philosophy and all this different, more theoretical part of the realm. I think that's also very important, and it relates to the integration part. I've been hearing so much about lots of young people going down to Peru and doing ayahuasca and different sessions, and then just taking 2 or 3 days and jumping back to their hectic New York or hectic city life. And the integration process there is not happening. And that's why these young people who don't have all the theory that they need, or don't really know how to start integrating the experience they had with their daily life, instead of seeking for these kind of help, because until today, even though it's growing, it's not as common to know that this is part of the experience. Lots of young people keep on going back and having a second or a third or a 10th ayahuasca session, and that's not going to give you the answer, because just what McKenna said, or what we are talking, just you need to hear the message, hang up the phone, and then do the work. And I think it's so good that the California scene, the Boulder scene are growing so much with integration, and it's great that we have all these conferences going on, like Psychedelic Science or Horizons, or all these different spaces that are opening up. I think that's quite important, and for me it's a game changer in the psychedelic world.
Yeah, it's definitely really interesting, the progress that these different organizations have. MAPS is one of them, and they're getting I've kind of always started now, my phrase that I like to say is that if it's kind of going on John F. Kennedy, and he said, if more politicians knew poetry and more poets knew politics, the world would be a lot better place. But then I expanded out to, if more programmers knew poetry and more poets knew programming and more scientists knew poetry and more poets knew science, I think the world would be a lot better place. And I use poetry as this broad sense of getting in tune with that kind of intuitive knowledge, but it needs to be coupled with that theoretical, that mathematical, and science knowledge. Like, they're not mutually exclusive, they're complementary to each other. And I think what I see is a lot of people get in this weird kind of myth that it has to be one or the other, and that our programmers are losing sight of that kind of poetry, and our poets sometimes lose some of that sense of the great wonder that is the biology of life, that math is this poetry of physics, and that when you're able to start doing that integration process, you don't see, as Missy likes to say, there are no divides. That everything is, my favorite metaphor of that is Indra's net, and it's like these net of jewels that connects everything out throughout the whole cosmos, the inner and the outer.
The psychedelic part, and what I did with this, was I began to think about time. I've always had this idea that our physics has failed us because it is not true to experience, and every advance in physics has been gained at the expense of moving the terms of physics further and further away from anything that could be called concrete experience. Then found a way to mathematically quantify it so that it could be, instead of a network of lines running forward and backward against each other, it became a single line running in one direction into the future, into the future, into the future. In its own terms, it is a self-consistent idea about time that tries to be true to experience. It's saying that time is made of elements. It is not simply an event space, something required for things to have duration. You see, before Einstein, space was thought of as the place where you put things, the necessary adumbration of a thing having being was that it be in space. Einstein came along and said, no, time can be thought of as a surface, as a continuum, as something which in and of itself can affect the outcome of the propagation of a beam of light or an electromagnetic field or something like that. What this idea suggests is something similar about time, that time is made of elements, and that what we intuit about time is more true to the facts of the matter than what physicists are telling us about time. What we intuit about time, and what astrology and all forms of prophecy and intuition and clairvoyance and all these things are the idea that we can know about time by deploying our feelings into it. What this theory does is take what has generally been a very feeling-toned, intuitional kind of idea and mathematicize it and give it rigor and say that with a very simple computer we can predict novelty. We can understand, first of all, that what is happening in the world of becoming, the world that we all experience as beings, is that novelty is entering into being, and it is changing the modalities of the real world toward greater and greater levels of integration.